The galactic coalition was crumbling. The Krell Dominion's advance had shattered every defense, tearing through fleets that had stood unchallenged for centuries. The Xeric, the oldest and most revered species, had lost their homeworld in a single campaign. The once mighty Vertari, with their cybernetic warforms, had seen entire legions turn to dust. Even the ruthless Tarvax, whose warriors prided themselves on never retreating, had been annihilated. Now, the remaining leaders of the coalition gathered in the War Council aboard Verdant Spire, a station orbiting a dying star. Every species had sent its highest-ranking officials, not to strategize, but to argue. Because despite their collective power, no one wanted to fight. The Xeric High Chancellor's voice rang out, sharp and unwavering. We must discuss who will hold the line. Someone must stall the Krell long enough for an evacuation. Silence. Cold, heavy, suffocating silence. The Vortari warlord, his voice mechanical through his cybernetic augmentations, finally spoke. Our fleets have been reduced to fragments. We are in no position to hold anything. The Tarvax ambassador, a towering brute of muscle and armor, snorted. A glorious last stand means nothing if it is futile. One by one, the most powerful species in the galaxy offered excuses. The Xeric refused to commit their remaining fleets, calling them too strategically valuable. The Vortari claimed their warforms needed time to regenerate. The Tarvax, once known for their undying pride, admitted they had nothing left to give. Then the inevitable came. The moment everyone knew was coming. All eyes turned to the single human representative standing at the edge of the chamber. A small, unimposing figure among giants. Commander Elias Vance. A dozen unreadable alien expressions stared at him. Some expectant, others indifferent, a few openly amused. Vance knew what they were thinking. Humans were weak, unfit for war, cowards. Their entire existence in the coalition was tolerated because they were adaptable and harmless. In the grand order of species, humans were the ones who negotiated trade deals, produced entertainment, and provided minor technological innovations. They were not warriors. He took a slow breath. We'll do it. A ripple of disbelief spread through the chamber. The Xeric Chancellor blinked. Clarify. Vance met her gaze, his voice steady. Humanity will hold the line. Laughter. Cold and sharp. The Tarvax ambassador chuckled. A deep, guttural sound. Your species has no military victories to its name. You think you're, what? Tactical retreat specialists can succeed where empires have fallen. Vance didn't react. He had expected this. They saw humans as nothing. A species that had never fought a full-scale galactic war. Their soldiers were viewed as peacekeepers, not warriors. Their fleets were smaller, their weapons outdated compared to the monstrous arsenals of the elder races. The Xeric Chancellor narrowed her golden eyes. You understand what this means? You will not be reinforced. Your people will die. Vance nodded. We understand. More silence. Not the cold, suffocating silence from before. This was different. A murmur rippled through the council. The other species exchanged uncertain glances. No one had expected this. They had expected excuses, pleas for mercy, desperate bargaining, not acceptance. The Tarvax ambassador leaned forward, studying Vance as though seeing him for the first time. You're serious? Vance simply said, We are. That was when the amusement faded, because suddenly, a thought crept into their minds. What if humans weren't as harmless as they seemed? The Xeric Chancellor exhaled, a slow, calculated breath. Very well, human. The battlefield is yours. And just like that, humanity was sent to die. The moment the council adjourned, Vance transmitted the orders. Humanity's fleets, scattered across the stars, mobilized. Not a single ship refused. The largest human war fleet in history moved to intercept the Krell Dominion. The coalition did not expect them to succeed. They did not expect them to last more than a few hours. They expected a slaughter. And for the first few days, that's exactly what it looked like. The Krell descended on the contested system with overwhelming force. Their warships were not mere machines but living behemoths, their hulls pulsing with organic plating, their weapons extensions of their own monstrous flesh. Humanity, by comparison, had standard metal warships, ballistic weapons, and outdated plasma cannons. They were smaller, outgunned, outnumbered, outmatched. The first engagement was brutal. The human front lines collapsed within hours. Hundreds of ships fell. Thousands died. The coalition watched from afar, already composing their posthumous tributes to the fallen, brave humans. But then, something strange happened. Humans did not fight like the others had. They didn't form traditional battle lines. They didn't throw themselves into suicidal charges. They retreated, over and over, falling back, abandoning planets, refusing direct engagements. To the coalition, it was shameful. Proof that humans were exactly what they had always assumed, cowards. The Tarvaks scoffed. We gave them a warrior's death, and they choose to run? The Xeric Chancellor sighed, almost pitying. This is what happens when you send a prey species to do a predator's job. They prepared to move on, to discuss how they would negotiate their surrender to the Krell. But then, something even stranger happened. Despite their constant retreats, humanity wasn't losing. No matter how hard the Krell pushed, no matter how overwhelming their numbers, they could not advance beyond a certain point. Every time they thought they had broken through, they found themselves ambushed by human fleets in unexpected locations. Their warships fell into carefully placed minefields, their supply lines severed by unseen forces. Their communications failed. Their logistics collapsed. The Krell, a species that had never known resistance, began to struggle. And only then did the coalition realize the humans weren't running. They were leading the Krell exactly where they wanted them. The Krell had expected conquest. They had expected another swift and brutal victory, like all the others before it. What they did not expect was frustration. At first, the war seemed like it was following the same pattern. The human forces fell back, abandoning colony after colony. No grand battles, no desperate last stands, just cold, methodical retreat. It was almost insulting. The Krell warlords saw it as nothing more than delayed inevitability. But then their fleets started slowing down. It was subtle at first. A supply fleet went missing. A forward command post lost contact. Small inconveniences, annoying but insignificant. Then it started happening everywhere. Ships veered off course due to false navigational data. Orbital refueling stations mysteriously detonated before Krell forces even arrived. Entire communication arrays vanished without a trace. Every attempt to push forward was delayed by hours, then days, then weeks. The Krell warlords grew impatient. Their doctrine relied on overwhelming momentum, smashing through defenses before an enemy could react. But now that momentum was gone, and they didn't understand why. They tried to force a decisive engagement. They chased human fleets, pushing forward with all their strength. And every time the humans slipped away, forcing them deeper into unknown space, further away from their supply lines. Still, the Krell believed they could crush this resistance. They sent their elite hunters, their most experienced war beasts, to corner and finish the human forces. They found nothing but ghosts. Human ships flickered in and out of existence, appearing where they shouldn't be. Entire fleets would vanish from sensor readings, only to reappear behind enemy lines. And every encounter ended the same way, Krell forces losing ships while humanity lost nothing. It wasn't just retreat. It was a trap. The Krell were being bled dry. They didn't understand human warfare. Their species had evolved on conquest, on direct engagements, on crushing enemies through raw power. But humans did not fight like the others. They didn't rely on superior firepower. They relied on deception, misdirection, and patience. They never attacked head-on. They never fought fair. Instead, they lured the Krell into empty star systems with no strategic value, forcing them to waste time and resources on nothing. Every time the Krell launched an assault, they walked into pre-laid traps. Gravity mines disabling their engines, automated drone fleets harassing them before slipping into slipspace, entire planets rigged to detonate the moment Krell forces landed. The frustration turned into anger. The Krell did not know fear, but they knew rage. And now they were enraged. The warlords ordered a full-scale, reckless push. They would stop trying to chase the humans. They would gather their entire armada and crush the core worlds in one overwhelming strike. That was the biggest mistake they could have made, because that was exactly what the humans had been waiting for. The Krell fleet surged forward, ignoring all caution. They abandoned their damaged ships, left behind their slower forces, determined to reach humanity's strongholds before their forces could retreat again. And at first, it seemed like it was working. The humans did not run. For the first time, they stood their ground. The Krell felt a surge of savage triumph. Finally, the humans had nowhere left to flee. Finally, they would see what true war was. They did not realize what was happening until it was too late. The moment the Krell fleet crossed into human territory, the system collapsed around them. Their navigation systems jammed. Their long-range communications went silent. Their reinforcements, still waiting in the outer systems, found their jump drives disabled. Then the killing began. The human fleet, fully intact, emerged from hiding. They were not outnumbered anymore. They were not outgunned anymore. Because now they had the advantage. Humanity had spent months shaping the battlefield. Every asteroid, every orbital station, every gravity well had been engineered to trap the Krell. The first wave of human ships didn't fire a single shot. Instead, they unleashed an electromagnetic pulse across the entire warzone, frying the organic cybernetics that powered Krell vessels. Half of the invasion force went dead in the void, their ships drifting helplessly. The second wave came from the planets themselves. Krell forces had landed on multiple human colonies, expecting easy slaughter. What they found were fortified death traps. Entire cities had been converted into kill zones, every building filled with hidden explosives, every street rigged with automated turrets. The humans had let them land, and now they couldn't leave. The final wave was pure annihilation. Human warships, using weapons the Coalition had never seen before, tore through the remaining Krell forces with brutal efficiency. It wasn't just advanced weaponry. It was targeted destruction. Every shot aimed to cripple instead of kill, to ensure no ship could retreat, no survivor could warn the others. The Krell panicked. For the first time in their existence, they had no idea what to do. They weren't fighting warriors. They were fighting something else. Something that didn't care about honor, about glory, about meeting them in battle. Something that had studied them, broken them, and used their own arrogance against them. The humans had never been retreating. They had been hunting. The Krell never knew fear. They had crushed entire civilizations, burned homeworlds to dust, and wiped species from existence. Fear was something lesser beings felt. But now, in the cold silence of space, surrounded by burning wreckage and the corpses of their war beasts, they felt something they had no name for. They had been dismantled. Not through superior firepower, not through brute strength, but through something far worse, calculated, ruthless efficiency. Every tactical advantage they had relied on had been stripped away. They couldn't communicate with their remaining forces. Their supply lines were gone. Their warships, once unstoppable, had been reduced to drifting husks. They had fought species that resisted before. Some had put up impressive fights. None had done this. None had studied them so thoroughly, learned their weaknesses so completely, and turned their own nature against them. The humans had predicted every move, anticipated every reaction, and manipulated them like pieces on a game board. This wasn't war. This was something else. The remaining Krell commanders refused to accept it. Their doctrine allowed no room for failure. There was only forward, only conquest. And so, in their desperation, they did the only thing they could. They called for reinforcements. Every Krell war fleet across the sector received the order. Abandon all secondary objectives. Forget the smaller battles. Every available warship was to regroup and crush humanity before this infection spread. The humans had defied them. That defiance could not be allowed to exist. But there was one problem. The message never reached them, because humanity had already intercepted it. The moment the distress call was sent, human operatives embedded within Krell communication networks hijacked the transmission. They didn't block it. That would be too obvious. They rewrote it. The incoming fleets received new orders, false orders. Some were told to retreat to distant sectors. Others were ordered to attack each other, believing they had been infiltrated by human spies. Confusion spread like wildfire. Entire divisions turned against one another. The Krell, a species that had never known deception, had no defense against it. By the time the truth was realized, it was too late. The reinforcements never came. The last remaining Krell forces, cut off and surrounded, faced a reality they had never considered. They had lost, not in a glorious last stand, not in a desperate, honorable fight to the death. They had been outmaneuvered, outthought, and broken. Some tried to fight anyway. They were wiped out in hours. Some tried to flee. They were hunted down before they could escape human space. And some simply surrendered. For the first time in their species' history, Krell warlords lowered their weapons, not out of strategy, not as a ploy, but because they had no other choice. They begged for mercy, and humanity gave it to them. Not because they were weak, not because they were kind, but because they had already won. The war was over. The Krell, once the apex predators of the galaxy, had been broken. Their fleets were in ruins, their warlords captured or dead, and their empire, once thought unshakable, had collapsed under its own weight. Humanity did not celebrate. There were no grand declarations of victory, no parades, no triumphant speeches. The galaxy had learned something far more important than who had won. It had learned what humanity was. For centuries, humans had been dismissed as insignificant, weak, cowardly, a species that avoided direct conflict, that relied on retreat and deception rather than facing its enemies head-on. Now, the galaxy understood. Humanity had never been weak. They had never been cowardly. They had simply waited. They had studied every empire, every species, every war. They had watched the rise and fall of countless civilizations. And when the time came, they had done what no one else had ever dared to do. They had out-evolved war itself. The Krell had been unstoppable until they weren't. They had been invincible until they met an enemy that didn't fight on their terms. And now, the rest of the galaxy watched in silence, wondering who would be next. Because if humanity had done this to the Krell, the most feared species in existence, what could they do to the others? What would happen if another empire made the same mistake? No one wanted to find out. And so, for the first time in recorded history, the galaxy chose peace. Not out of diplomacy, not out of morality, but out of fear. Humanity did not demand tribute. They did not claim new territories. They did not ask for anything at all. They simply stood at the center of it all, silent and patient, as the galaxy rewrote its understanding of power. And everyone knew they would never be underestimated again.